Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. I kind of alluded to this in a couple videos prior, but I did just finish up Wuthering Heights for the very first time, sort of. So I thought it would be a great time to do a second episode of Dissecting Gothic Literature. So today we will be talking about Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. If you've seen my other episodes of Dissecting Gothic Lit, there will be spoilers in this, lots of spoilers, so I do not recommend watching this unless you are interested in hearing a ton of stuff that will totally ruin a lot of the plot in Wuthering Heights. So Wuthering Heights is widely considered to be like one of the best books ever written. It is always on like timeless classics. It is always on the like 100 books you have to read kind of list. And I had never read it, and so I was like, ooh, I have to dive in and see what this book is all about. I've heard it's really interesting because the main characters are like anti-heroes or whatnot. Like, always thought it would be something that sounded right up my alley. And so about 2 or 3 years ago, I went out and I bought this, and I got 130 pages in. And I don't remember disliking it, but I did get bored with it and I stopped reading it. And so you can even see like the first 130 pages when I went through with it, I had a pen and I was taking notes and I was just going through the whole thing, trying to dissect it all and like give it a whole like grade school analysis on what was going on. And then I just stopped reading it at some point and forgot about it. And when I moved into my new apartment, I saw the book again and I was like, you know what? I gotta go back and read this because it's apparently a Gothic story. It's apparently a dark romance. This sounds like everything up my alley. It is not. It is not. So let's break this down for a little bit. So Wuthering Heights was written in 1847 by Emily Bronte. She is one of the 3 Bronte sisters. They're all famous writers. It is Emily, Charlotte, and Anne. Most people know Charlotte Bronte because she wrote Jane Eyre, which I've not read, but I will be reading very soon. And because she was a woman writing a novel that is going to be quite controversial, in the 1840s, she released the novel under the name of Ellis Bell. It was originally written as like 3 parts, but Wuthering Heights is actually only 2 parts, and the 3rd part I believe was written by Anne Bronte, and it's just a completely separate novel. It's nothing to do with Wuthering Heights. So this novel is considered to be part of the like romantics, the romanticism kind of thing. So it is a romance novel that is also a romanticism novel, and it is also heavily Gothic. It is considered one of the first Gothic novels. It's not the first Gothic novel, because it was written in the 1840s, and the first is what, like 1764, the Castle of Otranto, Count of Otranto, whatever it is, that one. Sorry, I haven't read that either. It's on my list. And this was very heavily inspired by Romeo and Juliet and King Lear, and I really wish I had known that going into the book instead of after, because I feel like I would have understood, or at least like gotten its angle a little bit more, especially the King Lear part. You know, it is not the cute like Cordelia side of King Lear, it is very much the King Lear side of King Lear. If you read King Lear, I hope that makes sense. And the whole like tragic forbidden love that you see in Romeo and Juliet, but like even more tragic and even weirder than, you know, like the age differences in Romeo and Juliet. Like this gets weird. This gets weird. And it was very controversial when it first came out because of how amoral and evil many, if not all, of the characters are in this novel. And I think that is where my problem comes in with this. This story has, in my personal opinion, absolutely no likable characters. It has no engaging characters. It has no anti-hero, so to speak of, where I'm like, yes, like you are the Walter White. I understand why you are evil. Like, I understand why you do the things that you do. It is for a greater purpose. Like, you became this. No, the people in this novel are evil to be evil. And in my opinion, this is also not a love story. This is more of like a warning of like, don't bully children and don't abuse your children, because nurture versus nature is a very, very, very important thing. and things will go awry very quickly. If you abuse your children, don't do that. That's big no, and here's a whole book on why not to. So Wuthering Heights is set on the Yorkshire moors, which is kind of this awful bog of a place. Like it's really windy. Like Wuthering Heights is one house, and it's like up on the heights, and Wuthering means like super windy and blustery, and it is. It's this kind of dilapidated farmhouse that's been there for like 350 years or something like that. And then there's across the way, there is the Grange. We're just gonna call it that because I'm gonna sputter over that the whole time, which is way more refined and nice and beautiful and kind of upkept. And they're kind of these polar opposites, which basically represent a lot of what's going on in the book. And supposedly Wuthering Heights and the Grange are both based off of real places that Emily Bronte used to visit, but it is not really known entirely which buildings and which locations were the actual inspiration for those locations. The book also grew in popularity when it came out that the book was actually written by a woman and not a man. The topics were so controversial that a lot of people were really interested in the biography of the author, and then it eventually did come out that it was actually written by a woman, and it actually boosted the interest in the novel and definitely helped to bring it to the level of fame that it has today. So one of the things that happens in Wuthering Heights, which I really love in novels, is the use of an unreliable narrator and sort of like a frame story. The problem is I didn't necessarily like how it was done in Wuthering Heights. So it's an unreliable narrator told through a frame story twice. So our main narrator is this man named Mr. Lockwood, who is a tenant now at the Grange years and years after the beginning of this actual story takes place, asking the maid who works there to retell the story to him because she used to live there. So she kind of becomes our key unreliable narrator because she kind of has a reputation at stake as she's telling the story. So you can definitely tell that she sugarcoats a lot of the things in the story to either make her look good or make her decisions seem more plausible or make more sense. If you read the book, you will see she has some very questionable decisions, and I think she has a somewhat clear motive that makes her actually more of a sinister character than a likable character. I kind of read the novel, she's about the same age as Heathcliff, so I always read the novel since she kind of grew up with Heathcliff. She was always secretly in love with him, and he never wanted anything to do with her, so she was always jealous of Catherine. So I think that's why in a lot of scenes in the novel, she kind of lets Heathcliff get his way, even though she knows that she's putting many other people in danger or in very negative situations that she could easily turn them away from. You know, like there's so many scenes where characters like, I'm going to Wuthering Heights, and she's like, oh no, don't do that, you shouldn't do that, as she like walks that person there. You know, like it's very strange. So we have these levels of unreliable narration, so a lot of what we're hearing, we don't necessarily know if it's true or not. And so the novel opens with Lockwood meeting Heathcliff, the younger Cathy, and Hareton at Wuthering Heights. So the first scene that we get is the results of the story that we're going to learn, of like where these characters are now, and there's a lot of people that like are missing. Like Heathcliff's son we know is dead. We know that Cathy is living with this other man who's about her age, but we don't know why. We don't know their relation. Like there's so many things that we don't understand about it. And as the book unravels, like of course you get more and more clarity, so that the intro scene makes way more sense than it does when you first read it. Part of what bothered me with Wuthering Heights is I actually really liked the first like 4 chapters. I thought they were really interesting. There's this amazing scene where Lockwood is sleeping over at Wuthering Heights, and he sleeps in a room he wasn't supposed to, and we find out it's because that's the room that our original Catherine's ghost comes and haunts, right? And I loved that ghost scene. I loved seeing the madness of Heathcliff, and I loved seeing Lockwood's absolute confusion and the ghost being this horrifying figure tormenting the window, and Heathcliff just desperately clinging to get back to her, and us having no idea why that's happening. And I really thought that was going to be the tone for the entire rest of the book, and it just wasn't at all. Ghosts only show up one other time in the book, and it is at the very end. Actually, the only times that we really experience ghosts are in these like intro and outro scenes with Lockwood, which I think is very interesting. One, of course, is like a rumor, and then the other, of course, is Lockwood's firsthand experience. But I was really hoping there was going to be more ghosts and more haunting and more like forbidden romance of like the afterlife. No, none of that takes place here. So the one good thing about this opening ghost scene is that we do know that Heathcliff is aware of the ghost. And I think that this makes a lot more sense when we get to the end of the book, but he does know that there is a ghost, and he is perpetually yearning for Catherine to come back to him. I think that's a very strong motive in here. And it is something that I think benefits a lot of like understanding Heathcliff and why he does these horrible things. Doesn't excuse or justify any of them, but it does make a little bit more sense if he's like seeing the ghost of his like long lost love. So there's that. So then we get through the whole mess that is the story of Heathcliff being adopted into Hindley and Catherine's family by Hindley and Catherine's father. The father favoring Heathcliff as if he was his own son, Hindley being jealous of that, and when Hindley takes over the house, basically treating Heathcliff like absolute garbage. He basically takes him from being a nobleman's adopted son to making him a servant, ensuring that he can't read and write, and just making him do all of the base chores. So naturally, when Heathcliff grows up and is able to take Hindley's place, because Hindley squanders away Wuthering Heights through gambling and basically hands it straight on over to Heathcliff, that is exactly why Heathcliff ends up treating Hindley's only son, Hareton, in the exact same way. So we understand that Hareton isn't allowed to read or write or have any kind of knowledge or schooling because Heathcliff wasn't. He is treated as a servant because Heathcliff was. You know, it's this enacted revenge upon the descendants of the dead. Why? Because that's the only way that Heathcliff can seem to enact his revenge, is by taking it out on people who will not be around to see the revenge acted upon. When we think about that, it's kind of weird. It's like, why would you do that? It doesn't affect anything. But if we go back to the fact that Heathcliff very heavily believes in ghosts, and that ghosts continuously are tied to the earth, there's your answer, because he thinks that those ghosts will probably be aware of it. He knows that they will see their children being not only tortured and destroyed by Heathcliff, but then he will be taking over their property, their kids, their land, their money, you know. So maybe that's a weird motive for Heathcliff, but it is something that is extremely subtle throughout the novel. And then of course there's Catherine, who I think Catherine is such an unlikable character. The fact that Heathcliff goes through so much awful stuff and does all these horrible things for Catherine, it just is mind-boggling to me. She's a spoiled little girl who is in love with her childhood best friend, who is demoted to being a servant, and therefore she marries the snobby, kind of bratty neighborhood boy next door because he has wealth and status and she wants wealth and status. So she completely neglects Heathcliff, throws him completely aside, kind of regrets it, but like never really seems to regret it, and then just goes off and tries to play both of them as if they were her toys until her death. She's always guilt-tripping Edgar into letting her see Heathcliff and having Heathcliff come, but telling her she will never leave Edgar for Heathcliff. Like, it's a mess. She is an absolute brat who was never told no. Which is why her child, I think this comes to the nature versus nurture thing, has a lot of these like inner bratty tendencies that stem from Catherine, versus you can see Edgar tries to raise her to be a more ladylike, but there's definitely this divide of her being an absolute spoiled brat and her being kind of the loving and caring person that Edgar ends up being as he gets older. We just see this with Hareton, of her initially thinking he is a nobleman's son and then looking down upon him when she realizes he's not anymore, that he is kind of a servant, and then again making fun of him for not being able to read, versus her eventually trying to teach him to read because she understands like how like just wicked it was to make fun of him for trying and not being up to par with her. So and then we get to Isabella and Heathcliff, and the whole Isabella storyline pisses me off. I mean, like, Heathcliff is such an evil, manipulative person that he forces Isabella to fall in love with him solely to piss off Edgar. He doesn't love Isabella, and then he treats her like absolute crap. When she escapes and has his child, she shields Linton from him, and when Heathcliff finds out that he has a son 12 years later, what does he do? He goes and forces the son to come and live with him, even though he could have had like a nice life with Edgar and Kathy. And he's like, nope, I'm going to take this child, have absolutely no responsibility for him, because all I need is for him to grow up, marry Catherine's daughter, Kathy, and then I can take over all of Edgar's land. How horrible is that? And in doing so, not only does he corrupt the good nature of Linton by treating him so horribly, he then lets him die of an illness because he doesn't believe a doctor is needed, because the only purpose Linton serves to him is to screw over Edgar. And how does he get Linton and Kathy to marry? He kidnaps them. He kidnaps them. And he keeps Catherine locked up until she will marry Linton. And then he's kind of like, cool, so I'm also gonna maybe keep you here so you miss your father's death, because I'm literally just that horrible and cruel. And I can't understand why people like this. And then we get to the weird end where all of a sudden Heathcliff's like, oh, I can't look at Hareton and Kathy anymore because they're falling in love as my prisoners, and they look just like Catherine, who I was in love with, and I can't see their eyes because I just am reminded of her, so I don't care what they do, I'm gonna starve myself and die so I can go and become a ghost and haunt the moors with Catherine. Oh, also, while all of this is going on, he digs up her grave at one point and removes one of the sidings of her coffin so that when he dies, he can have his siding removed on his coffin and they can be buried in a joint coffin together. Like, just psychotic. And the sad part is, where does this come from? Heathcliff is created by Hindley treating him like crap as a child. If Hindley had just shown Heathcliff respect and treated him like a brother, none of this would have happened, because Catherine probably would have married Heathcliff and they could have gone and been awful spoiled people together and brought misery upon nobody else but themselves, right? But the fact that Hindley just wanted to put Heathcliff down just destroyed the whole thing. And the one thing I have to say is I almost wonder if this is Emily Bronte's weird kind of progressive for her time spin on like racism. She's so heavily influenced by Shakespeare that I can't imagine she didn't read Othello and see how Othello was treated in that for being of a darker complexion. And it is very, very apparent and spoken about very much that Heathcliff is also of a darker complexion. They say that he's got dark skin and dark hair as if he was like a gypsy. I'm not 100% sure where that means he is from, but he definitely doesn't look like Catherine, who was blonde and beautiful, or Edgar and Isabella, also very fair. And so I think that there is definitely this, like, because he looked different, he was treated like less of a human being. However, the complication with that is the fact that he grows up to become like one of the most evil people I think I've ever read about in literature. Like, he's just a horrible, horrible person, but the beginnings are there. The beginnings are definitely there. And that's the only thing that I can really think of, is that it's just this overarching message of like, be kind to people who are different from you. You know, it is at the end of the day something that Kathy learns about Hareton, is she's mean to him for being seemingly of a lower class than her, even though he's of the same class. She's mean to him because he isn't as educated as her. But once she learns to treat him better and show him the respect he deserves, they become like a nice, happy couple. Sort of, I don't, happy is just like the wrong word. I don't know what they are. They're weird, but they're compatible and they work. And so yeah, it just very much, again, goes back to this nurture versus nature of like, do we create the monster? Was Catherine created by being spoiled versus Heathcliff being created by being neglected? And is that why they deserve each other? Because when they were children, they didn't see these differences of status and education, but were taught that. So like, maybe there's something progressive about this. But I just think it's really dismal and despicable. And I just, look, what it comes down to is people who think that this is a love story, you need to explain to me why you think this is a love story. Because to me, it's definitely way more a warning against, like, don't be evil towards children, you will corrupt them and they will grow up to be these villains, as well as like, don't be racist. you know, but the love story thing, I just don't see that. I mean, Catherine and Heathcliff like running around the moors being ghosts and haunting people. Oh, okay, that's the great love story. And those are just rumored, right? Like, nobody in the story actually sees their ghosts, which I also think is interesting. There is a tangible ghost at the beginning. We understand Catherine is a ghost. We understand that Heathcliff doesn't really believe in heaven or hell, so he just assumes he's going to become a ghost. So did that really happen? I don't know. I didn't love this novel. It was definitely really hard for me to get through. The first act and then the last act, I definitely was a little bit more in tune to. Once Linton kind of comes in and has an attitude and kind of turns on Kathy for his own selfish reasons. Again, nature versus nurture. He was very kind when he was raised by Isabella. The second he was put into Heathcliff's clutches, he kind of became this whining, needy, entitled asshole, for better, for lack of a better word. But I don't know. I think that's really kind of the key thing here. I do think it's a very interesting novel. I will say I've never read anything like it. I don't think I've ever read any book where I just really despise pretty much every single character. Even Edgar, who ends up kind of being a good dude at the end, is still very kind of pompous. He's very annoying as a child. Isabella is very needy as a child. Catherine is spoiled. Cathy is arrogant. Hareton is just raised to be this kind of brute. Linton is this whiny, spoiled, and then neglected, entitled child. Heathcliff is just evil beyond evil. Hindley is spiteful and drunk. Like, there's just... And Nellie, I think Nellie, like, really entraps some of her people, or some of her, like, charges, because she knows that's what Heathcliff ultimately wants. Like, I think everybody in the story has some self-serving purpose, you know? And I didn't want to read a book about entirely selfish people doing horrible things to each other, and why none of them ever really leave except for Isabella is just beyond to me. They never leave. This is the 1840s. Like, come on, guys, you don't have to stay in one of these two houses. You can take a horse and go somewhere else. You know, Heathcliff left for 3 years, and he came right on back to enact his revenge. Other people can leave and escape what's happening. So yes, Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights, this was a 3-star read for me. I'm glad I read it. I do think that there's a lot of depth and complexity there. I do think that it is definitely a book worth reading, but definitely go in knowing, like, this is a story about awful people doing awful things, and not a story about, like, forbidden love or however it's marketed, because this is not a love story. This is a very dark, depressing story about an evil, evil man. So yes, and that is all that I have for you guys today. Let me know in the comments down below what other Gothic lit novels you would like to see me dissect. If you like these videos, please hit a like and subscribe button. That helps me out a lot. Again, I post every Monday and Thursday, and thank you all so much, and I will see you guys in the next one. Mwah.